Roxanne Coleman squinted against the bright light. After 5 years in Huron Valley Women's Correctional Facility, the Detroit sun seemed unnaturally bright. She clutched a plastic bag containing her personal belongings, all that remained of her former life. Worn jeans, a t-shirt that now hung on her like a coat hanger, and an envelope with $250, the standard starting allowance for released prisoners. "Good luck, Roxy," said Warden Jones, closing the heavy metal door behind her. "And don't come back." Roxanne nodded without turning around. She had no intention of doing so. It had been 5 years since, in a fit of rage, she had pushed her dealer, who lost his balance, fell, and hit his head on a concrete corner. Manslaughter. 5 years for a moment of rage and an accident. The bus was waiting for her at the stop. Roxana sat by the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Detroit hadn't changed. The same dilapidated buildings, closed factories, and rare islands of new construction. The city was dying and being reborn at the same time, just like her. Social services provided Roxana with temporary housing, a room in a hostel for former prisoners on the eastern outskirts of Detroit. After receiving the keys to her room, the first thing she did was take a shower. The water ran without time limits. No one knocked on the door to hurry her. Small joys of freedom. The next day, Roxanne went to the clinic for a mandatory medical examination. The rehabilitation program for former prisoners included free medical examinations and basic medical care for the first year after release. "Miss Coleman?" Dr. Lane, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, gestured for her to come into the office. "Have a seat." Roxanne tensed when she saw the expression on the doctor's face. "Is there something wrong with my test results?" Dr. Lane took off her glasses and rubbed her nose. "I have some unpleasant news, Miss Coleman. Your HIV test is positive." The world around her suddenly fell silent. Roxanne heard the doctor say something about modern treatments, about how HIV was no longer a death sentence, about the need to take medication regularly, but the words seemed to pass through her without registering in her mind. "When could I have been infected?" she finally asked, interrupting the doctor's monologue. "It's difficult to determine. Judging by the indicators, the infection probably occurred in the last year or year and a half. Were you tested in prison?" "Only when I was admitted. Then," Roxana faltered. "Then there was Kevin, and those syringes. Once, just once, she gave in to weakness." "I see." Dr. Lane wrote referrals to specialists and a prescription for antiretroviral drugs. Roxana left the clinic, clutching the papers in her hands and feeling the ground slip away from under her feet. Why? The question pulsed in her head. She had just gained her freedom, and now she found herself in a new prison, a life sentence. Back at the hostel, Roxana lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Images from the past flashed before her eyes. Happy days with Roland, their wedding, the first signs of his infidelity, her growing dependence on pills, her arrest, the trial, and then the news that Roland had filed for divorce while she was in pre-trial detention. Coward, she thought. He didn't even wait for the verdict. In the days that followed, Roxanne mechanically fulfilled all the requirements of the rehabilitation program. She attended group therapy, consulted with a social worker, and looked for a job. All this time, the thought of her diagnosis never left her. In the third week after her release, Roxanne got lucky. A small cafe called Donna's on the outskirts of downtown was looking for a part-time waitress. The owner, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, gave Roxanne an appraising look. "Do you have a criminal record?" "Yes," Roxanne didn't lie. "Unintentional manslaughter. I served my full sentence." Donna frowned, but then nodded. "I appreciate your honesty. You'll be on probation for 2 weeks. I'll pay you in cash, and you can keep your tips." Working at the cafe was a lifesaver. The monotonous tasks, the orders she had to memorize, the conversations with the cooks, all of it distracted her from her dark thoughts. By the end of the second week, Roxana's hands were covered with small burns from hot plates, and her legs were aching from fatigue, but she felt satisfied. For the first time in a long time, she had earned honest money. "May I help you?" Roxana looked up from the menu she was wiping with a damp cloth. Standing in front of her was a man in his 40s wearing a gray suit and a light blue shirt. His tired eyes and frowning face revealed a man who rarely smiled. "Of course, yes." "Have a seat," she said, pointing to a free table by the window. "What would you like to order?" "Coffee. Black, no sugar." The man unbuttoned his jacket and sat down. "And apple pie, please. Is it fresh?" "Donna bakes them every morning," Roxana smiled. When she returned with the coffee and pie, the man was talking on the phone. "Third case this month. Same pattern." He noticed Roxana and fell silent. "I'll call you back." "Enjoy your meal," she said, placing the plate in front of him. "Thank you." He looked at her intently. "You're new here, right? I come to this cafe a couple of times a week and haven't seen you before." "I've been working here for 2 weeks," Roxanne replied. "I just started." The man nodded and took a sip of coffee. "Detective Ray Morgan, Theft Division." He extended his hand to her. "Roxanne Coleman." She paused for a second before shaking his hand. "Waitress, as you can see." I noticed. A spark of humor flashed in his eyes. Over the next few days, Detective Morgan became a frequent visitor to the cafe. He always came at the same time, around 3 in the afternoon, ordered coffee and sometimes cake, looked through some papers, and left after half an hour. Sometimes he exchanged a few words with Roxanne, but more often than not he was silent, lost in his thoughts. On Thursday, when there were few customers, Morgan stayed longer than usual. "Hard day?" Roxana asked, refilling his coffee. "A series of thefts in the neighborhood." He rubbed his nose. "Someone is robbing apartments while the owners are at work. No signs of forced entry." "Maybe someone they know? Someone who has keys?" Morgan looked up at her. "Possibly. But in all cases, the victims claim they didn't give anyone keys." "What about the building manager, or former tenants who could have made copies?" The detective raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Not a bad theory. Where did you learn all this?" Roxanne tensed. Should she tell him about her past, or keep quiet? Sooner or later he would find out if he checked her out. "I was on the wrong side of the law," she finally said. "I served 5 years for manslaughter." She expected to see disgust or fear, but Morgan just nodded. "I see. How long ago were you released?" 3 weeks ago." "How is it?" There was no judgment in his voice, only professional interest. "It's difficult," she replied honestly. "The world is too fast and loud." He nodded understandingly. "It's always hard at first, but it gets easier." He finished his coffee and stood up. "Thanks for talking, Roxanne. And for the key story, I'll check with the managers." She watched him leave and, for the first time in a long time, felt something like hope. Maybe a new life was possible after all, even with her past, even with her diagnosis. That evening, back in her room, Roxana took an orange pill bottle out of her nightstand. Antiretroviral therapy, her new reality. She swallowed the pill and lay down on the bed, listening to the sounds of Detroit at night outside the window. Somewhere out there, in this city, lived Roland, her ex-husband, who had abandoned her at the most difficult moment. I wonder if he knows she's free. 2 weeks turned into a month. Roxanne had already gotten used to the rhythm of working at Donna's cafe. The clatter of dishes, the smell of coffee and pastries, the muffled conversations of the customers. All this created an illusion of normality that she so desperately needed. Detective Morgan continued to visit almost every day, and gradually their short conversations became longer. One evening, when Roxana was finishing her shift, he offered to drive her home. "It's late, and this area isn't the safest," he said, turning up the collar of his coat. She hesitated. On the one hand, Morgan seemed sincere and unbiased. On the other hand, experience had taught her not to trust men, especially those who showed sudden interest. "I'll just give you a ride, that's all," he added, noticing her indecision. No ulterior motives. They were silent in the car for the first few minutes until Morgan broke the silence. "Have you always been a waitress? Before all this?" "No." Roxanne looked out the window at the lights of Detroit rushing by. "I worked in a call center. Nothing special, but the pay was good." "And how did you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "How did I end up in prison?" Roxanne turned to him. "You're a cop, Morgan. I'm sure you've already run me through the system." He looked slightly embarrassed. "I did. Manslaughter. But I wanted to hear your version." Roxanne took a deep breath. "My version is no different from the official one. I pushed a man in a fit of rage. He fell, hit his head on a concrete corner, and died. One moment, one movement, and 2 lives destroyed." "2? His and mine." She turned back to the window. "My old life ended that day." When they pulled up to the hostel, Morgan stopped the car but didn't rush to unlock the doors. "Listen, I investigated that theft case. You were right about the manager. He made duplicate keys and sold them to his nephew, who robbed apartments. I'm glad I could help." Roxanne smiled sincerely for the first time. "I wanted to say thank you." He handed her his business card. "If you ever need help or just want to talk, give me a call." Roxanne took the card and got out of the car. Detective Raymond Morgan, Property Crimes Division. Under the name was a phone number and email address. She put the card in her pocket and went up to her room. That night, she dreamed of Roland. It wasn't the first time he had appeared in her dreams, but this time the dream was so vivid that she woke up with her heart pounding and a feeling of his presence. 8 years ago. "You're amazing," Roland whispered, kissing her neck. "The most beautiful woman I've ever met." They met at a company party. Roxanne worked at a call center serving clients of an investment company where Roland was a junior financial advisor. He noticed her right away, a striking brunette with an infectious laugh. "I'm not sure we should," she began, but his lips cut her off. 3 months later, they moved in together, and a year later, they got married. Roxana remembered their wedding in minute detail. A small ceremony in the park, 20 guests, her simple white dress, and gladioli, her mother's favorite flowers, who had not lived to see this day. The first 2 years were happy. Roland got a promotion. They bought a small apartment in a relatively affluent neighborhood and planned to have a child. But then everything started to fall apart. At first, it was little things. Roland was staying late at work more and more often, and he smelled of expensive women's perfume, which Roxana never used. He became irritable and distant, and their intimate life almost disappeared. "Don't you love me anymore?" she asked him once when he rejected her again. "Don't be silly," he said without even looking up from his laptop. "I'm just tired. I have an important project." The projects followed one after another, and the distance between them grew. Roxana started taking sedatives, then moved on to stronger pills. Depression and anxiety slowly ate away at her from the inside. The day she found the messages, everything changed. Roland had left his phone at home, and the screen lit up with a notification of a new message from E. "Can't wait for tonight, my love." Roxana, as if hypnotized, unlocked the phone. Roland always used their wedding date as his password, how ironic, and read the entire conversation. Emily, 26 years old, works at a pharmacy near Roland's office. Their affair had been going on for 7 months. When Roland came home, she was in an incoherent state, a mixture of pills, alcohol, and rage. They yelled at each other, threw things, and then she ran out of the apartment. Present. Roxana sat on the bed, trying to push the memories away. After that argument, she wandered aimlessly around the city until she met that dealer. She wanted something stronger than pills, something that would drown out the pain of betrayal. When he tried to make her pay not with money, but in kind, she pushed him away. One move, and her life went down the drain. The next day, Roxana worked the morning shift. The cafe was half empty, just a few people reading newspapers or staring at their phones. The bell above the door rang, and she turned, ready to greet the new visitor. "Hi, Roxy. Long time no see." She froze. Kevin Warren, her former cellmate, or rather, her neighbor in the prison block. They had crossed paths during community service and in the dining hall. It was with him that she had once shared that ill-fated syringe. "Kevin," she tried to speak evenly. "What are you doing here? I heard from mutual friends that you work in this area," he smiled, revealing uneven teeth. "I decided to stop by and see an old friend." "We're not friends, Kevin." Roxana picked up a tray and began collecting dirty dishes from the neighboring table. "Come on, don't be so cold." He sat down at the bar. "Bring me some coffee and something to eat." She reluctantly fulfilled his order, feeling the tension in her shoulders. "How long have you been out?" she asked, placing a cup in front of him. 3 weeks ago." He took a sip of coffee. "About the same as you. I got a job as a bartender at the Blue Cadillac on 8th Street. Not a bad place, especially for an ex-con." Roxanne nodded, hoping the conversation would end there. But Kevin seemed to be in the mood to chat. "I heard about your diagnosis," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry." She froze. "How did you know?" "I have my sources," he shrugged. "But don't worry, I won't tell anyone. We're in the same boat after all." "What do you mean?" Kevin leaned closer. "I have HIV too, Roxy. I've had it for 3 years." She took a step back. "Did you know when we—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "Of course not." He looked offended. "What do you take me for? I found out later. That's why I've been trying to stay away from you these past few years." Roxanne didn't know whether to believe him or not. Kevin had always been a master manipulator. Rumors circulated in prison that he was serving time for fraud and forgery, although he himself never said what he was in for. "What do you want, Kevin?" she asked bluntly. "Just to talk to an old friend." He smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Maybe we could have dinner sometime? Remember the good old days?" "We didn't have any good old days," Roxanne snapped. "And I have no desire to have dinner with you." "As you wish." He finished his coffee and put $10 on the counter. "But if you change your mind, I'm at the Blue Cadillac almost every night. By the way, I heard your ex-husband is now a big shot at his office, and he got married again. I saw him with his new wife at that bar a couple of times." Roxanne's heart skipped a beat. "Roland goes to the Blue Cadillac?" "On Fridays, usually." Kevin stood up. "He's so successful with his young wife. They were celebrating something there recently. Her promotion, I think. She's the manager of some pharmacy now." After Kevin left, Roxana felt weak in the knees. Roland, here, in Detroit, with his new wife. She knew he hadn't left town, but she had somehow blocked that thought out of her mind, not allowing herself to think about a possible encounter. Friday was Roxanne's day off. She paced around her room all day, trying to convince herself not to go to the Blue Cadillac. It would be foolish, painful, and potentially dangerous, both for her and for Roland. But when evening came, she put on her makeup, slipped into the only decent dress she had bought with her first paycheck, and called a taxi. The Blue Cadillac turned out to be a pretentious bar with neon signs and a bouncer at the entrance. Roxanne ordered the cheapest cocktail on the menu and sat in a corner where she could see the whole room. She noticed Kevin behind the bar, mixing drinks and flirting with female customers. An hour passed. Roxanne was about to leave when the door opened and they walked in. Roland had hardly changed, the same confident movements, neatly trimmed beard and smug smile. Next to him was a young woman with chestnut hair gathered into an elegant bun. She was beautiful, with the refined, aristocratic beauty that Roxana had never had. The couple sat down at a table in the center of the room. Roland helped the woman take off her coat, kissed her gently on the cheek, and whispered something in her ear. She laughed, and Roxana felt her heart sink. It was the laugh of a happy, confident woman. "Emily and Roland Coleman," Kevin's voice rang out. He had quietly approached her table. "A happy couple. You know her name." It wasn't a question. "I told you they were frequent guests." Kevin sat down opposite her. "She's the manager of the Health Farm pharmacy chain. He's a senior financial advisor at Brighton Vest. They recently bought a house in Grosse Pointe. They live like a fairy tale." "How do you know all this?" Roxana kept her eyes on Roland and Emily. "People like to talk to the bartender," he shrugged, "especially after a couple of cocktails." Roxana watched Roland gently hold Emily's hand and look at her adoringly. He used to look at her that way. "Does he know?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the couple. "About what?" "About you. About the fact that you know me." Kevin smiled. "No, of course not. I'm just a bartender who pours him whiskey. I'm sure he doesn't even remember my name." At that moment, Roland looked up and scanned the bar. Roxanne instinctively sank into her chair, although she was hardly visible in the dim light. But for a split second, she thought their eyes met. She froze, waiting for a reaction, but Roland simply continued his conversation with Emily, showing no sign that he had recognized his ex-wife. "You'd better leave," Kevin said, noticing her tension. "It's not worth stirring up the past." But it was too late. The past had already come to life and was standing right in front of her, in the form of a happy Roland with his new wife, living the life that should have been hers, the life she had lost because of a moment of rage. Roxanne stood up, threw the money for the cocktail on the table, and quickly headed for the exit. Once outside, she greedily inhaled the cool evening air. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She took it out and saw a message from an unknown number. "Are you okay? This is Ray Morgan." She stared at the screen, not knowing how to respond. How did the detective get her number? It wasn't difficult, though. He probably got it from her rehab program documents or the police database. "Yes, I'm fine," she finally typed, even though nothing in her life was fine. "Want to talk? I'm not far from your neighborhood." Roxanne hesitated. The rational part of her mind screamed that she shouldn't get close to a cop, that it could end badly. But another part, tormented by loneliness and the shock of meeting Roland, craved human warmth and understanding. "I'll be at my place in half an hour," she replied, and put her phone away. Ray Morgan was waiting for her at the entrance to the hostel, leaning against his car. When Roxana approached, he silently opened the door for her and offered her a seat. They drove a few blocks and stopped at a small 24-hour cafe. Here, in the quiet and calm of the nighttime establishment, Roxana told him everything. About her diagnosis, about meeting Kevin, about how she saw Roland with his new wife. Morgan listened without interrupting. There was no pity or judgment in his eyes, only attentive understanding. This gave Roxana the strength to continue talking, to open up to a man she barely knew, but who now seemed to be the only support in her crumbling world. They parted around midnight. Morgan drove her back to the hostel and shook her hand goodbye. That simple, restrained touch strangely calmed Roxanne, as if proving that not everyone would shy away from her because of her diagnosis. However, once she was alone, she felt a wave of despair rising inside her again. Roland had continued living his life while she rotted in prison. He had built a new family, achieved success, and bought a house in a prestigious neighborhood. And her? She had nothing but a small room in a hostel for former prisoners, a low-paying job, and an incurable disease. Roxanne pulled a worn shoebox from under her bed, all that remained of her former life. A few photographs, a wedding ring she hadn't sold even in the hardest times, a few postcards and letters. She sorted through these pitiful remnants of her past, and memories came flooding back. 7 years ago, she and Roland were sitting on the roof of their apartment building, watching the sunset over Detroit. The bottle of wine they had bought to celebrate his promotion was almost empty, In 5 years, I'll be a senior financial advisor, Roland said, putting his arm around her shoulders. We'll buy a house in the suburbs, maybe in Grosse Pointe or Birmingham. We'll have children, 2 or 3. What about my career? Asked Roxanne, already slightly drunk from the wine and his closeness. You can stop working if you want. He kissed her temple. I'll earn enough for both of us. The idea of being a housewife, the wife of a successful financier, the mother of his children, seemed tempting, but foreign, not hers. Roxanne had always wanted something more, although she didn't know what exactly. She liked working, having her own money, and independence. What if I don't want to stay at home? She turned to him, studying his reaction. Then you'll have a brilliant career, and we'll hire a nanny. Roland smiled. We can do anything, Roxy. Together. But things didn't turn out that way. At first, Roxana really tried to build a career. She enrolled in marketing courses and found a job at a large call center with prospects for growth. But Roland, contrary to his previous words, began to hint more and more often that she shouldn't be so absorbed in her work, that their home was neglected, that he was tired of eating convenience foods. You know how important my career is to me, he said once after another argument. I need to focus on work, not worry about everyday trifles. What about my career? Roxana objected. You said yourself that you would support me. But not at the expense of my success. His voice turned cold. Be realistic, Roxana. I have much better prospects. She gave in. She cut back on her working hours and took on all the household chores, trying to create the perfect home for her husband. But Roland had already distanced himself. Now he was more interested in corporate parties, which he increasingly attended alone, new business acquaintances, and, as it turned out later, Emily. Roxanne put the box back under the bed. The memories caused her almost physical pain. She lay down, but sleep did not come. A picture stood before her eyes. Roland and Emily in the blue Cadillac, happy, successful, their perfect lives built on the ruins of her destiny. In the days that followed, Roxanne walked around in a daze. She mechanically performed her duties at the cafe, answered questions, and even smiled when necessary. But inside, something seemed to have broken. Morgan came in twice, and both times she avoided conversation, limiting herself to short phrases. She was ashamed of her candor that night. On Friday, Kevin showed up at the cafe again. He sat down at the counter and ordered coffee, watching Roxana with an inscrutable smirk. Did you see your ex? He asked, when she placed the cup in front of him. Roxana didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. I can tell you more. Kevin lowered his voice. For example, that your Roland isn't such a perfect husband. He has his secrets. I don't care. She tried to walk away, but Kevin grabbed her arm. Really? His eyes narrowed. Did you know he had dealings with my brother? Financial fraud, money laundering, all that stuff? That's why Rob went to prison, while your precious Roland got off scot-free. Roxanne froze. She had never heard of Kevin's brother, but if he was telling the truth, it explained a lot. What does that have to do with me? She pulled her hand out of his grip. Everything. Kevin smiled, but his eyes remained cold. After all, Roland is indirectly responsible for me ending up in prison, and therefore for your diagnosis. The circle is complete, huh? Roxanne felt nausea rising in her throat. If Kevin was telling the truth, then Roland was somehow connected to all her misfortunes, from her ruined marriage to her HIV infection. I don't believe you, she shook her head. You've always been a manipulator. Check it out for yourself. Kevin stood up. Robert Warren, serving a 15-year sentence in Milan for financial crimes and money laundering. Your ex was involved in the same scheme, but, as always, he got away with it. He left, leaving Roxanne with a buzzing head and a frantically beating heart. That evening, she didn't go to the hostel after work. Instead, she went to the public library, where she could use a computer and the internet for free. Roxanne typed Robert Warren Detroit Financial Crimes into the search engine and hit enter. The search results confirmed Kevin's words. Robert Warren, 48 years old, had been convicted 5 years ago for a series of financial frauds, including money laundering through a network of shell companies. The articles mentioned that several Brightinvest employees had been questioned in connection with the case, but no charges had been brought against them due to lack of evidence. Roxana remembered how, around that time, Roland had suddenly received a promotion, despite widespread layoffs at the company. At the time, she had been happy for him and hadn't asked any questions. Now, however, it all took on a sinister meaning. The next 2 weeks passed in a fog of anger and despair. Roxana hardly slept or ate. She performed her duties at the cafe mechanically, avoided conversations with Morgan, and spent all her free evenings researching Roland and Emily's past. Using the library computer, she found their address in Grosse Pointe, a beautiful 2-story colonial-style house with a well-kept garden. She learned that Emily had had an impressive career at Hell's Farm, rising from a regular pharmacist to the manager of a chain of pharmacies in just 4 years. Too fast, Roxana thought, imagining how Roland had used his connections to advance his new wife's career. One evening, after a particularly difficult shift, Roxana couldn't take it anymore and drove to their house. She knew it was crazy, that she shouldn't do it, but she couldn't resist the overwhelming urge to see how Roland lived without her. The taxi dropped her off 2 blocks from the house. Roxanne walked slowly down the quiet street, feeling like a stranger among the manicured lawns and expensive cars. She stopped in front of the house she was looking for, hiding behind a large oak tree. The lights were on, and through the uncurtained windows on the first floor, she could see the living room, a spacious room with a fireplace and stylish furniture. Emily was sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine, looking at something on her tablet. Roland entered the room, leaned over, and kissed her on the top of her head. Such a simple, intimate gesture. He used to kiss Roxana like that when she sat on their old sofa studying her course materials. Roxanne felt tears welling up in her throat. She stood there, hidden in the darkness, watching someone else's happiness, the life that should have been hers. They had stolen everything from her, Roland with his betrayal, Emily with her youth and success, Kevin with his infected syringe, his brother with his shady dealings. All of them, in one way or another, had led her to where she was now, sick, lonely, watching someone else's life through a window. In the days that followed, Roxanne began to regularly follow Roland and Emily. She learned their schedule, when they left for work, when they returned, where they had lunch, where they went on weekends. She kept a special notebook where she wrote down all the details of their lives. It became an obsession, the only thing that mattered to her. Her own life was falling apart. She was late for work twice, and Donna gave her a stern warning. She missed a doctor's appointment and didn't pick up her medication on time. She almost stopped eating and sleeping. Dark circles under her eyes and sharp features made her almost unrecognizable. One evening, Roxanne was watching the Coleman house as usual. It was cold and drizzling, but she stood pressed against the trunk of an oak tree, feeling no discomfort. Her attention was completely focused on the lit windows, where the shadows of Roland and Emily were moving. "What are you doing here?" Roxana flinched and turned abruptly. Detective Morgan was standing in front of her, in plain clothes, but with a police badge on his belt. His face expressed a mixture of surprise and concern. "I was just walking." She took a step back, feeling panic tighten her throat. "In Grosse Pointe? In the rain? 10 miles from your hostel?" Morgan shook his head. "Don't lie to me, Roxanne." "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "Are you following me?" "No," he sighed. "I live here, 3 blocks from here." Roxanne felt the ground slip away beneath her feet. Morgan lived in the same neighborhood as Roland. It couldn't be a coincidence. Or could it? "Do you know Roland?" Her voice trembled. "Are you acquainted with him?" Morgan frowned. "Roland? No, I don't." He followed her gaze and understood. "Are you following your ex-husband?" Roxanne remained silent, unable to admit it or lie. "Come on." Morgan gently took her by the elbow. "I'll take you home. You need to warm up and talk." She let herself be led away, feeling a strange relief at being exposed. Part of her wanted someone to stop this madness, this spiral of obsession into which she was sinking deeper and deeper. They were silent in the car. Roxanne stared out the window at the lights of Detroit rushing by, feeling something dark and dangerous growing inside her. Hatred for Roland and Emily, for the system that had allowed him to wriggle out of trouble and build a new life, while she paid for a moment of weakness. Hatred for the disease that was slowly killing her. Hatred for herself for allowing all this to happen. Morgan didn't take her to a hostel, but to his home, a small but cozy apartment in an old brick building. He made tea and gave her dry clothes, his t-shirt and sweatpants, which were too big for her but dry and warm. Then he sat down opposite her and simply waited for her to speak. And Roxanne spoke. She told him everything, about Kevin and his brother, about Roland's financial machinations, about how she had been watching him and Emily for the past few weeks. She spoke incoherently, jumping from one thought to another, sometimes almost shouting, sometimes breaking into a whisper. When she finished, the room fell silent. Morgan sat motionless, thinking about everything he had heard. "What you're doing," he finally said, "is stalking. It's illegal, and you could get another sentence." Roxanne smiled bitterly. "So what? Another 5 years in prison? With my diagnosis, I'm not likely to live that long." "Don't say that." Morgan leaned forward. "Modern therapy. It's not about therapy," she interrupted. "It's about justice. Why does Roland get to live his perfect life while I slowly die? Why did the system allow him to avoid responsibility for financial crimes while I got 5 years for an accident? Why is Emily building a career while I'll never have one because no one will hire a former prisoner with HIV?" Morgan didn't have the answers to these questions. No one did. The world was unfair, the system was selective, and people like Roland always got away with it. "I can help you," Morgan said after a long pause. "If what you said about the financial fraud is true, we can open a new investigation. But you have to stop going after them. Promise me." Roxanne nodded, but she knew deep down that she couldn't stop. She had gone too far. The thought of Roland and Emily living their perfect life had become an obsession that was eating away at her from the inside. She smiled at Morgan, thanking him for his concern, but a plan was already forming in her head. She would continue to watch them, but she would be more careful. She would learn all their secrets, all the dirty details, and when the time came, she would use that knowledge. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she felt that the answer would come to her. A dark figure slipped to the back door of the Coleman house in Grosse Pointe. The rain, which had started in the afternoon, intensified at night, creating the perfect sound curtain. Gloves to protect against fingerprints, silent footsteps, a hood to hide her face. Everything had been thought out. The lockpick easily opened the back door lock. Alarm system, surveillance of the house provided the answer. Roland, confident as always, rarely turned it on. "The neighborhood is safe, why bother?" His words reached the observer through an open window a week ago. The house was quiet. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room broke the silence of the night. The figure moved confidently, as if it had rehearsed the route many times. And indeed it had. Hundreds of hours of surveillance, dozens of times mentally walking the path. Roland and Emily Coleman slept in the master bedroom on the second floor. Emily always took sleeping pills, stressful work, migraines. Roland usually read before bed, but never stayed up past 11. His work required a clear head. The figure climbed the stairs, each step calculated to avoid creaking the old floorboards. The knife in the hand glinted with dull metal, not reflecting the light. The matte coating on the blade had been chosen specifically. The bedroom door was ajar. Emily didn't like to sleep in a completely closed room. Roland was snoring, lying on his back, his arm thrown back behind his head in his usual pose. Emily curled up on her side of the bed, her back to her husband. What happened next was quick and inevitable, like a blow of fate. First Roland. He didn't even have time to wake up when the blade cut his throat with a precise movement. Then Emily. She opened her eyes a second before the end, but the sleeping pill slowed her reaction. The horror in her eyes gave way to emptiness. There was a lot of blood, more than expected. The figure retreated, trying not to get dirty. Gloves, knife, clothes, everything was destined for immediate destruction. No traces, no clues. The room was left behind. The figure slipped down the stairs, through the kitchen, to the back door. The rain intensified, washing away any possible traces. The dark street swallowed the night visitor as if he had never been there. The bodies were not discovered until morning, when the housekeeper arrived for her weekly cleaning. Her scream woke the neighbors, who called the police. Roland and Emily Coleman had been dead for several hours. Detective Ray Morgan had not yet finished his morning cup of coffee when the call came in. A double murder in Grosse Pointe was rare for this affluent neighborhood. He didn't immediately understand why the address seemed familiar. Only when he pulled up to the house, cordoned off with police tape, did he remember. It was the home of Roland Coleman, Roxanne's ex-husband. His heart skipped a beat. Morgan stopped the car, trying to collect his thoughts. Coincidence? It couldn't be. Just a week ago, he had caught Roxanne watching this house. She was obsessed with revenge, her mental state deteriorating with each passing day. He had tried to help, but felt he was losing touch with her. Inside the house, there was organized chaos as forensic work was underway. The bodies were still in the bedroom, and the medical examiner was just finishing the preliminary examination. Time of death? Morgan asked, putting on latex gloves. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, replied the expert. I'll be more precise after the autopsy. Cause? The same for both. Carotid artery dissection. Professional work, I'd say. Clean, quick, effective. Morgan looked around the room. There was blood on the bed, on the walls, on the floor, but no signs of a struggle. The victims had been killed in their sleep or immediately after waking up, without having time to resist. Any signs of forced entry? He asked, turning to the officer who was taking notes. A lockpick on the back door. The alarm wasn't on. Surveillance cameras? Only on the front. The backyard isn't visible, and with the rain, visibility is minimal. Morgan went downstairs. The living room, kitchen, Roland's study, everything was neat and untouched. No signs of a robbery. Roland's laptop was on the desk in the study. Emily's jewelry was on the dressing table in the bedroom. This was not a random attack or a robbery gone wrong. It was premeditated murder, an execution. He went out to the backyard. The rain had washed away most of the evidence, but the forensic team was still methodically searching every inch of the area. One of them called Morgan over. Found anything? The detective asked. Maybe. The technician pointed to the ground near the fence. A shoe print. Incomplete, but clear enough. Small size, probably a woman's shoe or a teenager's. Morgan felt a chill run down his spine. A woman's shoe. Not a professional killer, not a robber. A woman. Roxanne was petite. Her shoe size was smaller than average. Back at the station, Morgan began to organize the information. A list of suspects. Roland Coleman, a financial advisor, could have made enemies among his clients. Emily Coleman, who ran a chain of pharmacies, could also have had detractors. But the way the murder was carried out pointed to personal revenge, to deliberate, cold-blooded retribution. And then there was Roxanne. Abandoned, sick, her life in ruins, obsessed with revenge against her ex-husband. A woman whom he, Morgan, had tried to protect and guide onto the right path. He called Donna's cafe. "Is Miss Coleman on duty today?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound casual. "No," Donna replied. "She called this morning and said she wasn't feeling well." "Why?" "No particular reason. Morgan tried to sound casual. Just wanted to order some coffee to go. He hung up and leaned back in his chair. Roxanne hadn't come to work the day after the murder. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe she really was sick. Or maybe she was physically and emotionally exhausted after her nighttime visit to the Coleman home. In the hours that followed, the investigation gained momentum. Neighbors and colleagues of Roland and Emily were interviewed, and their financial records and phone contacts were checked. Some interesting details came to light. Roland was indeed involved in some shady financial dealings. Several of his clients had lost large sums of money as a result of risky investments he had recommended. Emily, it turned out, had access to controlled substances and had been seen several times violating protocols for their accounting. By evening, Morgan had gathered enough information to form the main versions. He returned home late, exhausted, with a headache and heaviness in his chest. He poured himself a whiskey, sat down in an armchair, and stared at the wall. Thoughts of Roxanne haunted him. He remembered their conversations, her candor, the pain in her eyes when she talked about her past. Could he have prevented what happened? Should he have arrested her for stalking Roland instead of just warning her? The phone rang. It was a call from the lab. Detective Morgan, we have the results on the shoe print and hair samples from the Coleman house. And? The print belongs to a women's athletic shoe, size 7. It's not a very common model, sold only in a few stores in Detroit. Morgan's heart beat faster. The size matched Roxanne's shoe size. And the hair? Dark, long, female, found on the bedroom floor. Doesn't belong to the victim. Emily Coleman had medium-length brown hair. We're checking the DNA, but it will take some time. Morgan thanked them and hung up. Dark, long hair, like Roxanne's. It could be a coincidence. Maybe the hair belonged to a family friend, a visitor, a housekeeper. But combined with the shoe print, Roxanne's absence from work, her obsession with revenge. The next morning, Morgan decided to take action. He drove to the hostel where Roxanne lived, having checked her location beforehand. He had to see her, talk to her, look her in the eye. Maybe then he would understand whether she was capable of what he suspected her of. Roxana opened the door after the second knock. She looked pale, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. "Morgan? What are you doing here?" "Can I come in?" he asked, not answering her question. She hesitated, then stepped back, letting him into the small room. Morgan looked around. A bed, a small table, a wardrobe. On the table was a notebook, a pen, and some pills. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would indicate involvement in the murder. "Have you heard the news?" he asked, watching her reaction closely. "What news?" Roxanne looked genuinely puzzled. "About Roland and Emily Coleman." She froze, then slowly shook her head. "No. What happened to them?" "They were killed," Morgan said, keeping his eyes fixed on her face. "Last night, in their home." Roxanne paled even more. Her hand trembled, and she grabbed the back of the chair to keep from falling. "Killed? How did that happen?" "Someone broke into the house and slit their throats while they were sleeping," Morgan replied, watching every change in her face. Roxanne sank into a chair. She looked shaken, but Morgan couldn't tell if it was a reaction to the news or an act. He had been a detective for 15 years and had seen many murderers and their reactions. Sometimes the most cold-blooded ones turned out to be the best actors. "Where were you last night, Roxanne?" he asked directly. She looked up at him. "Here. I was here, in my room." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No." She shook her head. "I was alone. I took my medicine, then slept. I didn't sleep well, but I was here." Morgan nodded. He had expected that answer. No alibi, only her word. Not enough to clear her of suspicion, but not enough to press charges either. "Why didn't you go to work yesterday?" "I wasn't feeling well. Side effects from the new therapy. Nausea, dizziness, weakness. It could be true." Antiretroviral drugs often caused such reactions, especially when changing treatment regimens. "You understand that I have to ask you these questions," Morgan said after a pause. "Given your history with Roland, your obsession with him and Emily. Are you suspecting me?" Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "Do you think I'm capable of that?" Morgan didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "We have some evidence. A shoe print near the house, hair in the bedroom. We're checking the DNA." Roxanne turned even paler. "I didn't kill them, Morgan. I swear. Yes, I was watching them. Yes, I was obsessed. But I could never have done that." She cried, covering her face with her hands. Morgan stood motionless, torn by conflicting emotions. Professional duty demanded that he continue the interrogation, search her belongings, find evidence. Personal feelings, sympathy, compassion, the desire to protect, demanded that he believe her, calm her down, help her. Morgan chose a compromise. He did not conduct a search, did not press further. Instead, he said, "The investigation has just begun. We are checking all possible leads. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear." Roxanne looked at him with eyes red from crying. "I'll tell you who you should check. Kevin Warren. He knew Roland. He harbored resentment because of his brother. He knew I was watching the Colemans. And he has keys to their house." "Keys?" Morgan frowned. "How do you know that?" "I saw him show them to his friend in the blue Cadillac. He bragged that he could get into any house in Grosse Pointe. I thought he was just showing off, but it was new information worth checking out. Kevin Warren was already on the list of persons of interest in the investigation because of his brother's connection to Roland's financial shenanigans. But the keys could be an important detail." Leaving the hostel, Morgan felt torn. On the one hand, part of him wanted to believe Roxanne, to protect her from suspicion. On the other hand, the rational part, the detective part, couldn't ignore the facts. No alibi, a motive for revenge, psychological instability, and the physical ability to commit the crime. He got into his car and looked at her room window once more. Roxanne was standing at the window, looking at him, and at that moment, she seemed infinitely lonely and vulnerable to him. Could this woman have cold-bloodedly slit the throats of two people? Or was she just another victim of circumstance, driven into a corner by life? Morgan started the engine and drove away from the hostel. Ahead of him lay hours of investigation, interrogations, and evidence gathering. He had to find the truth, whatever it might be, even if that truth broke his heart. 3 days passed in intense investigation. Morgan hardly slept, methodically checking every lead, every suspect. He personally questioned Roland's colleagues, customers, neighbors, and the staff of the blue Cadillac. Kevin Warren was detained for 48 hours, but released after questioning. He had a solid alibi. On the night of the murders, he had been working at the bar under surveillance cameras. Morgan stood in front of a board covered with photographs, notes, and diagrams. Red threads connected the facts, but the full picture still eluded him. In the center of the board were photographs of Roland and Emily, their lifeless bodies on a blood-soaked bed. To the right were the suspects: Roxanne Coleman, Kevin Warren, and several of Roland's clients who had suffered financial losses. The DNA test results had not yet come back, but preliminary analysis showed that the hair from the crime scene belonged to a woman. The examination revealed particles of fabric under Emily's fingernails. Before she died, she managed to grab the killer's clothing. Black fabric, possibly from a jacket or gloves. Morgan's phone rang. "Detective, this is the lab. We have a problem with the DNA sample." "What kind of problem?" "The sample is contaminated. We'll have to repeat the analysis, and that will take another 24 hours, Morgan cursed. Time was working against him. With each passing day, the evidence was becoming less reliable and the witness statements more vague. He returned to his notes. He focused on Roxanne's words about the keys to the Coleman house. Kevin denied having the keys, and a search of his apartment turned up nothing. But what if Roxanne wasn't lying? What if the keys existed but Kevin no longer had them? Morgan went to the blue Cadillac. The bar was almost empty. It was a weekday, early in the evening. He showed his badge to the bartender and asked about Kevin. "Warren?" The bartender shrugged. "Haven't seen him since the day you took him in. He was supposed to come in for a shift yesterday, but he didn't show up. His phone isn't answering." This alarmed Morgan. He sent a patrol car to Kevin's apartment and returned to the station himself. New information was waiting for him on his desk, the results of a check of Roxanne's phone calls over the last month. Most of the calls were expected. Donna's cafe, the clinic where she was receiving treatment, her social worker. But one number caught Morgan's attention. Calls to it had become more frequent in the days leading up to the murder, and then stopped after the murder. A check revealed that the number belonged to a prepaid phone registered under a fictitious name. The patrol car reported that Kevin's apartment was empty and that he appeared to have packed his things in a hurry. Neighbors had seen him the night before with a large bag. Morgan issued a warrant for Warren's arrest. Everything pointed to a conspiracy. Roxanne and Kevin had planned the murder together. She, driven by a thirst for revenge, and he, possibly because of his brother, who was serving time for fraud in which Roland was involved. Morgan went to the hostel, but Roxanne wasn't there. She hadn't slept in her room or gone to work for 2 days. No one knew where she was. A neighbor at the hostel remembered that Roxanne had received a message, packed a few things, and left without saying where she was going. The trap had snapped shut. Morgan knew he was losing them both, Roxanne and Kevin. But he had one lead left. Kevin's phone could be tracked if he was still using it. An hour later, the techs picked up the signal, an abandoned motel on the outskirts of Detroit. Morgan took a support team and drove to the address. They surrounded the building and stormed inside. In a cheap motel room, Morgan found Kevin, dead, with a bullet hole in his forehead. A prepaid phone, smashed to pieces, and keys lay on the floor. The very keys to the Coleman house that Roxanne had mentioned. Everything fell into place. Roxanne had used Kevin to get information and access to Roland's house, then killed the couple, and then got rid of her accomplice to cover her tracks. Morgan issued a citywide manhunt. All bus stations, airports, and train stations received Roxanne's photo. But he knew it was useless. She was smart, planned everything in advance, and had surely planned her escape routes. In the evening, when hope was almost gone, Morgan received a call from a park on the banks of the Detroit River. A woman resembling Roxana had been spotted at the observation deck overlooking the water. He arrived alone, without backup. Roxana was sitting on a bench, wrapped in her jacket. Her hair was blowing in the wind. She looked calm, almost peaceful. "I knew you'd find me," she said without turning around. "You've always been a good detective." "Why Roxanne?" Morgan asked, sitting down next to her. "Why did you kill them? And Kevin?" She turned to face him. There was no fear or regret in her eyes, only fatigue. "You already know the answer," she said quietly. "Justice. Roland ruined my life, first with betrayal, then with financial schemes that put Robert Warren in prison and gave Kevin the opportunity to infect me. Emily knew everything, about the schemes, about how he abandoned me when I was behind bars. And Kevin? He wanted money, more and more." She shook her head. "At first he helped me watch them, gave me the keys to their house, and then he started blackmailing me. He threatened to tell you. I couldn't let that happen." "You could have come to me," Morgan said. "I would have helped you investigate Roland's financial schemes. We could have gotten justice through legal means." "Really?" She smiled bitterly. "How long would that take? And how long do I have left with my diagnosis? 5 years? 10, if I'm lucky? I couldn't wait. I wanted to see him fall in my lifetime." Morgan understood her motives, even sympathized with her, but he was a police officer, and his duty was clear. "Roxanne Coleman, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Roland and Emily Coleman, as well as Kevin Warren," he said quietly, almost regretfully. She did not resist as he handcuffed her. Just before getting into the police car, she paused and looked at the evening Detroit skyline, as if saying goodbye. The trial was quick. The evidence was irrefutable. DNA at the first crime scene, Kevin's murder weapon with Roxanne's fingerprints, testimony from witnesses in the blue Cadillac confirming her contact with Kevin before the murders. The jury found her guilty, but recommended leniency in light of her diagnosis and circumstances. Instead of life imprisonment, Roxanne received 30 years, a sentence that probably exceeded her remaining life. Morgan attended every hearing, watching the woman he had almost fallen in love with become prisoner, number 457832. After the verdict was handed down, he asked for one last conversation with her. "Do you regret it?" he asked when they were alone in the visiting room. "What exactly?" She looked at him emotionlessly. "That I killed them? No. That I got caught? Yes, of course. That I dragged you into this?" She paused for a moment. "Maybe. You were the only good person in this whole story." He nodded, accepting her answer. "I'll visit you," he said, "if you want me to." "Don't bother." She shook her head. "You'd better forget about me. Live your life, Ray. One of us ruined by this story is enough." 2 years later, Roxanne Coleman died in a prison hospital from complications related to HIV. Morgan learned of this from a brief official notice. He took a day off, drove to the cemetery where she was buried in an unmarked grave for prisoners, and left a bouquet of gladioli, her mother's favorite flowers.